بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وعظيمنا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وأصحابه الغر الميامين. الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية سيدي ومولاي علي بن أبي طالب. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. أما بعد، يقول الله في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. واذكر في الكتاب إدريس إنه كان صديقا نبيا ورفعناه مكانا عليا. The first of our salawat in honor of Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. The second in honor of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib. The third with your loudest voices in honor of the Imam of our time, Imam Sahib al-Asr wal-Zaman. Respected scholars, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. The story of Prophet Idris is one of the most fascinating stories within the Holy Quran, and is a story which requires a thorough analysis, for it is a story which affects each and every one of our lives. A story from which many a lesson may be learnt and many an example may be derived, and indeed a story with a historical basis and a contemporary significance. As we know, within the Holy Quran, there are the stories of 25 prophets of God. Some of these prophets, we mention their names and their stories on many occasions, whereas there are other prophets whose names and stories are hardly ever mentioned. As in, if you look at those 25 prophets of God, you'll find that from these 25 prophets, there are certain prophets who we are accustomed to listening to anecdotes about, who we are accustomed to listening to their narratives, who we are able to gain from an understanding of the people who lived in their time. Many times within our communities, the story of these prophets would always be repeated. So for example, the story of Prophet Nuh alayhi salam is constantly repeated. The story of Prophet Ibrahim is constantly repeated. The story of Prophet Musa, the story of Prophet Isa, and even the story of our holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. You find these prophets, their stories are always discussed. However, there exists a set of prophets in the Quran whose biographies and stories are hardly ever mentioned. And indeed, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided to discuss the stories of 25 prophets out of 124,000, there was a particular significance to these prophets. As in Nabi Nuh, Nabi Musa, Nabi Isa, Nabi Ibrahim, without a doubt, they occupy a prominent position as being arch-prophets of God. But that doesn't mean that the other prophets don't have any bearing or significance. No. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided to pick these 25, it meant the lessons from the stories of these 25 will remain with us until the end of our lives. You find that of the prophets whose stories are hardly mentioned, you find, for example, Prophet Lut. His story with Sodom and Gomorrah is hardly discussed on the pulpits. You find Prophet Hud. His story with the people of Ad is hardly discussed on the pulpit. You find Prophet Saleh. His story with the people of Thamud is hardly discussed on the pulpit. Likewise, Prophet Idris alayhi salam, if you were to ask many Muslims in the world today, what's the significance of the story of Prophet Idris alayhi salam? You'll find that many Muslims will turn around to you and tell you, to tell you the honest truth, I have not got a clue what happened in his life. And it's a shame that we've decided to take certain prophets above others. The fact is, each of these prophets acts as an exemplar for us in our life. Whatever we learn from Adam until Muhammad, you'll find that each of those messages are messages and lessons in our life. Therefore, when it came to dissecting these stories, these were not just historical anecdotes. These were lessons either in politics or in economics or in law or in spirituality, which were applicable to our lives in the 21st century. As in, I tell you, there is not a prophet of God mentioned in the Quran, but that his story relates to our life in one way or the other. And you know what's the beauty of the stories of each of these prophets? Each one of us in this hall finds something different in their lives which we can relate to. Prophet Idris alayhi salam, Allah mentions him in 2 places in the Quran. And there therefore is a need for us to understand what was so great about this prophet that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells our holy prophet in Surah 19. In Surah 19 verse 56 till 57 he says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَاذْكُرْ فِي الْكِتَابِ إِدْرِيسِ إِنَّهُ كَانَ صَدِّيقًا نَبِيًّا. And remember in the book Idris, he was a truthful man and a prophet of God. Notice when the verse says وَاذْكُرْ, it's telling the holy prophet, not only should you remind yourself of Idris, remind those of your religion of Idris as well. Because Idris was a man of truthfulness and indeed a man who was a prophet. Likewise, the second place where Nabi Idris is mentioned in the Quran, Surah 21 verse 85. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wa Ismail wa Idris wa dhal kifl kullum min as-sabirin. Ismail, Idris and dhal kifl, each and every one of them was of the patient. Let's look at the origin of Prophet Idris and seek to dissect his biography and see which famous incident occurred in his life that would allow us to understand the importance of rising against an unjust ruler, even if he be a Muslim in your land. Let's examine and dissect the story in depth. As we mentioned, the Prophet Idris alayhi salam, his name mentioned in the Quran as Idris. In Greek or Aramaic, it may come in a different pronunciation. You find, for example, in Greek, some have called him Hermes al-Haramisa. Today you may find there is a name by the name of Hermes or Hermes. Hermes al-Haramisa, that's one opinion as to the name of Idris. Another opinion is what? That his name was Enoch in the Bible. If you look in the Bible, there is the story of a prophet by the name of Enoch. Idris is his name within the Arabic language. And we find that there is a difference of opinion as to where he was born. Some opinions come forward and say that Nabi Idris alayhi salam was born in Babylon within Iraq. Another opinion was that no, he was born in Egypt. And that's why you find that some are of the opinion that of the great prophets who grew up in Egypt, Nabi Idris was one of them. You find that this prophet Idris alayhi salam was seen as the 3rd great prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As in Nabi Adam was seen as the first, and then Sheeth, and then Idris was the great grandson of whom? Of Sheeth. A question arises. We know very well that the first prophet to have come with a legal system was the prophet Noah. The question arises that the prophets who came before Nuh, what was their role with their people? As in, we know that Noah came with a law, isn't it? Abraham, or for example Moses, Jesus, each one of them until our holy prophet came with a legal system. They were known as Ulul Azm, the arch prophets of God. Someone says, okay, those prophets before Nabi Nuh, like Adam, like Sheeth, like Idris, what was their role? As in, if Moses came with the Torah and Jesus came with the evangel, and Muhammad came with the Quran, there were many prophets who came without a book. As in that prophet who came without a book, what was his role with his people? The first role of a prophet like Idris, when he hasn't come with a book, is to prove the oneness of God to his people. As in, I don't need to come with a book for me to explain Tawheed to my people. When Prophet Idris would come to his people, he would come and he'd discuss with them the existence of God. You find that this debate concerning the existence of God isn't just a debate now. As in today in universities, many students email me saying to me that I'm having a debate with people who are fans of people like Dawkins, or people like, for example, Hitchens and so on. They say that these people are of an atheist background. How do we debate them? That debate about the origin of belief isn't just in our time. No. Prophet Idris alayhi salam, his first role as a prophet of God, irrespective of whether he has a Bible or a Quran, is to bring people towards an understanding of the origin of the universe and the unseen. Number two is to bring people to an understanding of how to live ethically with each other. As in, let me ask you a question. Justice, is it seen as only something praiseworthy in Islam or in every religion? In every religion. Piety, honor, dignity, truthfulness, trustworthy. Do I need a book from God to teach me these ethics, or can I as a human being instill them in my society? A prophet of God like Idris did not need a legal system to talk about the importance of morality, isn't it? As in, every prophet of God, when he came to his people, had a similar line to Rasulullah. Rasulullah, what was his line? إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. I have come to perfect the morals of mankind. Nabi Idris likewise, he may not have had a Bible, nor did he have a Quran, but he came to perfect the morals of his nation. And that's why from the outset, when scholars discuss Nabi Idris, considering Nabi Idris was before Nuh, before Abraham, the scholars highlight that Nabi Idris introduced certain concepts to his society which would be main parts of our society today. Let me give you an example. In many narrations, the first person to have taught how to write to his community was Prophet Idris alayhi salam. As in, many people do not know this, that Prophet Idris alayhi salam was the first human being amongst his community who taught his people how to write. From the outset, he as a prophet of God has a duty. The duty is to improve the literacy and education of the people. The first human being who was ordered and commanded by God to teach his people how to write was the Prophet Idris alayhi salam. That's number one. Number two, Prophet Idris alayhi salam was revered as being the first human being and the first prophet of God to teach his people how to measure the weights of balances. When you bring the weights together and you want to bring balances in your commodities in the market, the narrations say to us that Prophet Idris alayhi salam was the first of the prophets to teach his people. If someone's gonna buy a certain commodity from you, bring it on the weighing scales, measure it, and then buy and then sell. Number three, the first prophet of God to have taught his people how to make weapons for hunting and for defense was the Prophet Idris alayhi salam. You find likewise on the fourth level, the first prophet of God to have begun discussions concerning the solar system was Prophet Idris alayhi salam. Because we know as human beings, go to any human, Hindu, Jewish, Sikh, Christian, you'll find them asking four questions all the time. A metaphysical question, a cosmological question, a psychological question, and an ethical question. Metaphysical question, is there an unseen force as the origin of this world? A cosmological question, what's the origin of this universe we live in? A psychological question, what's my role as a human being? An ethical question, how do I deal with other human beings? Nabi Idris alayhi salam, his people had a major concern about the cosmological aspect of the world they were living in. They were asking themselves that we can clearly see, if we reflect up top there, we can see bright stars, as in we can definitely see something glittering. Either I come to the conclusion that these came from a set of accidents, or I come to a conclusion that there must have been a necessary existence who begun. Because something cannot come out of nothing. There has to be an original creation. You found Nabi Idris alayhi salam would sit with his people and would be the first prophet of God to discuss the solar system, to discuss the stars in the solar system, up to the capacity which his people could comprehend. And that's why many of the scholars come forward and say that Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, the most beautiful aspect of his prophethood was that he had a job which wasn't only in the religious field. He went out and looked for a job where he could earn an income for his family. You see, today if you have a Maulana in your mosque, if you say to Maulana, why don't you go and work outside of your career, taking istikharas and reciting Salat al-Mayyit and reading nikahs. Of course, these are all important. These are vital aspects in our communities. But Maulana, why don't you go and get a job outside? You'll find many will say, well, to tell you the truth, my son, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has gifted me that I was able to study Islamic law, and therefore I don't really want to work. I'm a person who knows the laws of the religion. No, on the contrary, there is no embarrassment in a person who's a Maulana, who's a religious scholar, and also earning a living for themselves outside. Because Nabi Idris alayhi salam, while he was a prophet of God, had a profession. What was it? He was a tailor. A tailor. A tailor amongst his people. You bring your clothes to Nabi Idris. You want your clothes shortened. You want a piece of cloth stitched towards a particular angle. Nabi Idris, even though he was the closest of his people to God, he had a profession as a tailor. Come and sit with me and we'll help you with tailoring. And subhanallah, some of us today, if we hear someone's a tailor in the community, you know, in our communities we make certain jobs which are respectable and others which aren't. The moment you hear doctor, subhanallah, doctor. The moment you hear dentist, mashallah, dentist. If you hear engineer, brilliant. Lawyer, fantastic. Tailor, tailor? Say, what do you mean tailor? You mean that this person, all he does is cut and stitch and that's it? Oh Allah, the richest people in this world at the moment are all tailors, aren't they? As in walk down Rodeo Drive or Fifth Avenue or New Bond Street or Champs-Élysées. When you walk around, do you see those names on those shops or no? And you know, those shops aren't the cheapest shops in the world, are they? As in when you go through Rodeo Drive, you see these French and Italian names. You think to yourself, that jacket, is it really costing $20,000 for me to wear that jacket? At the end of the day, who made it? It's a tailor. That tailor, you can look down at him as much as he wants. He says, the moment my name, forget my name, my initial is on a jacket, I could put 4 figures on that jacket, isn't it? As in, we know very well. Nabi Idris alayhi salam, therefore what was he? He was a tailor. He was a prophet of Allah, but he earned an income as a tailor. And that's why every prophet of God took him as an example. Prophet Musa, for example, was a shepherd. Prophet Isa was a carpenter. Our holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, our holy Prophet, what do the narrations say to us? The narrations say to us that our holy Prophet himself worked for Khadija. And therefore you found that every Prophet of God had an income. In other words, Nabi Idris, when the Quran says, وَذْكُرْ فِي الْكِتَابِ إِدْرِيسِ إِنَّهُ كَانَ صَدِّيقًا نَبِيًّا. You ask many Muslims in the world, tell me about Idris. Oh Allah, I don't know about Idris. What do you mean you don't know? As in, at the end of the day, this is a Prophet of God from whom so many lessons may be learned. Nabi Idris, what was the main part of his story that remained with us until today? In the time of Nabi Idris, there was a king who was ruling his town. This town had many people who were God-fearing people. As in, it wasn't a town plagued by idol worship. There were many people who were God-fearing people. The king apparently was a believer in God. And this king owned vast amounts of land. When this king owned vast amounts of land, you notice that the powerful kings are of 2 types. There is a king who's arrogant with his power, and there's a king who's humble with his power. A king who's arrogant with his power is someone who, when he sees others within the land who have achieved success, he cannot bear that there are two who are achieving success like him. You find therefore that the narrations, what do they mention? The narrations mention very clearly that there is a king who hates when people share power. Then there's a king who is the embodiment of powerful. As one famous philosopher said, powerful isn't being able to use your power. It's being able to use your power but holding back from using it. You found that this king in the time of Prophet Idris alayhi salam was one day walking in the gardens. He was looking at the houses of the people of the town and he was proud of his city. He then saw a particular garden belonging to a house of a member of his community. When he saw this garden belonging to the house of the member of his community, the narrations, what do they mention to us? The narrations mention to us that he saw this house with this garden and he thought to himself, you know, what's going on here? As in, I love this garden. How is it someone has a garden that's more beautiful than mine? So he went to the owner of the house. He said to him, excuse me, I want to buy the garden from you if you don't mind. The owner of the house said, oh king, you are the leader of our land, but this is my only income for me and my family, as in this house supports us. The gardens are able to provide for us. I beg of you, allow me to keep this land for myself. The narrations mention to themselves what? The narrations mention to themselves that that king went back in a fit of anger. He entered his palace, said, how could someone have a garden more than mine? As in, I tell you, sometimes in life the worst disease is greed for the human being, isn't it? Subhanallah, sometimes in life you have and you have and you have, but if you're not content, it will eat you apart. That king had so much, but someone had a garden which he wanted. The narrations mention the king was sitting in his palace. His wife came up to him. She said, what's wrong with you? You seem like you're in a bad mood. He said, there's someone in our land who has a garden better than ours. She said, what do you mean? He said, I want the garden of this person. I'm telling you, if you see the garden, you will never see a garden like his. However, the respect that he deserves is there for his garden, and I can't really do anything. She said, what do you mean you can't do anything? You're the king of this land. At the end of the day, you're the most powerful person in this land. Subhanallah, sometimes shaitan comes in the form of a jinn. Sometimes it comes in the form of an ins as well, isn't it? As in the Quran even mentions that sometimes the shaitan may be a jinn or may be a human being. In our lives, you may find a wife whose husband has the worst influence on her. Sometimes the wife can be a bad influence to her husband. The narrations mention, she said to him that, listen, the narration said to him at this moment, the narration said that she said to him, why don't you go and kill? Isn't it better that you go and kill this person, finish him? He said, what do you mean kill? She said, he has something which you want. He said to her, no, I don't want to kill the person. All I want is his gardens. She said, well, if he's not selling you the gardens, what are you going to do? He said, you know what I'll do? I'll get some witnesses to say that this person has left the path of God and deserves to be killed. He said, what do you mean? He said, we'll get some witnesses to say this person used to believe in God. He's now apostated, and because he's apostated, the law of the land is if you leave the path of God, you are to be killed. And subhanallah, this king, he did it. He went, he got false witnesses. These false witnesses came and they said, we swear that that man with the garden has left the path of God and he blasphemes against the words of God. And I tell you, a king is so powerful. In one line, with a bit of money, he can destroy a nation. As in, I tell you, we're in 2012 now, aren't we? The same kings exist, doing the same things with the people. You find that this king, what was he doing? This king got these witnesses. These witnesses testified against this innocent man. They came and beheaded this man. Nabi Idris alayhi salam, did he sit back and watch? Of course not. Because a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot sit back and watch when injustice takes place, isn't it? As in, even if the king says La ilaha illallah, that king at the end of the day is a human like any other human. If he performs good, then we have reverence for him. If he performs wrong, then we are to speak out. Nabi Idris came up to the king. He said to him, how dare you perform this? Don't you fear God? As in, don't you know that that garden belongs to that man? He said to him, Idris, how dare you speak like this in a tone to me? I'm the king of this land. Nabi Idris said, it does not matter. As a prophet of God, my duty is to speak out against injustice. He said to him, if you don't stop speaking out, I will kill you and your family. Nabi Idris turned around to him. He said, O king, I warn you, if you continue with this type of action against innocent people who are God's creation on earth, then not only will your kingdom fall, but I guarantee you your wife will have dogs playing about with her body at the end when she dies. That king said, take away all these prophecies. You people come with your messages about ethics, your messages about how there is a God who is just. I don't see with these two eyes a God. You can keep your God to yourself. When he said this, Nabi Idris couldn't believe the arrogance of this man. As in this man, so much arrogance. And that's why the Quran, when it spoke about Nabi Idris, in Surah 21 verse 85, the Quran said, وَإِسْمَاعِيل وَإِدْرِيس وَذَا الْكِفْلِ كُلٌّ مِنَ الصَّابِرِينَ. Ismail, we knew he was known for his sabr, isn't it? Dhul Kifl, known for his sabr. Nabi Idris had to be patient at this time. Why? Because you know what the king said? The king said there's a death warrant for this Idris. Whoever sees him, he will be rewarded if he ends up killing Nabi Idris. Nabi Idris decided the best aspect for me here, the best option is what? I've already spoken out against this king. I've done my duty. Now it's time for me to leave this land. When he left this land, the narrations mention he hid in a cave. And the hadiths mention that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided that the angels will provide him with food while he was in this cave. It's as if when a person stands up against injustice, the angels of Allah come and protect that person. The narrations mention that this king eventually, what happened? Eventually he died. His kingdom was overtaken by another cruel king. The people of that land, a famine overcame them. There was no rain coming in whatsoever. When there was no rain coming in whatsoever, the narrations mention that Nabi Idris alayhi salam was far away from them. And they said, for 20 years, we have had no rain in this land. And there has been starvation according to certain narrations. Because of this, they came forward and they said that let's pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us that we saw a king and we never spoke out against his injustice and we remained silent. They all got together and supplicated. When they supplicated, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered Nabi Idris to return back to these people. He returned amongst them for a certain time until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as an honor for Nabi Idris speaking out against the king of his time, the Quran says, رَفَعْنَاهُ مَكَانًا عَلِيًّا. One interpretation of رَفَعْنَاهُ مَكَانًا عَلِيًّا was that we raised Idris with us as a gift to him because he was willing to speak out against injustice in his time. You found therefore Nabi Idris, according to many Muslims today, is one of the prophets of God who is in a state of ghaibah. If you go to many Muslims in the world today, they believe there are certain prophets of God who are in occultation. Certain prophets who Allah decided that they have a role at the end of time. Nabi Idris, for example, is one of them. Another of them is whom? Nabi Isa alayhi salam. Nabi Isa likewise, Allah raised towards the heavens. That's another one. A third is Nabi Khidr as well. Nabi Khidr, until today, is in a state of ghaibah. That's why you find it surprising, therefore, when we say that our Imam is in a state of ghaibah, Muslims turn around and say, what do you mean he's in a state of ghaibah? As in, what are you talking about? How could a man, your Imam, a man who's now 1,100 years old, what do you mean he's in a state of occultation? We reply by saying, hold on, isn't Idris in a state of occultation? They say yes. Isn't Jesus in a state of occultation? They say yes. Isn't, for example, Khidr in a state of occultation? Yes. So if Allah could put all of them in ghaibah, why can't he put Al-Mahdi in ghaibah as well? Even the context of Nabi Idris and Imam al-Hujjah is the same. Nabi Idris, a king who was cruel, Allah decided to raise him. Imam al-Hujjah was at a time of kings who were cruel. When they were looking to kill him, they knew there would be a son from the line of Fatima al-Zahra, salawatullah wa salamu alayha. a king from the line of a king who knew that from the line of Fatima al-Zahra there will be someone who will remove injustice from this world. Allah decided that first there would be a ghaiba known as al-ghaiba al-saghira, then the kubra, the great occultation taking place. Therefore the first lesson to be learned from the story of Nabi Idris was what? Was that Nabi Idris was the first of the prophets who Allah decided to provide him with an honor, bestow him that I will raise you in occultation until a day where you will rise with the Imam of the time. Number two, Nabi Idris provided Islam and provided a message for every prophet, that when there's a king who's corrupt in your land, do not remain silent simply to please the king. Because that particular ethos was instilled, that Islam abhors a land where there is a king who is unjustly treating his people. That Nabi Idris set a precedent for us as Muslims, that we as Muslims, when we see a king who is unjust, even if he says La ilaha illallah, even if he says Muhammad Rasulullah, it's our role to speak out. And you know there were many prophets who took this on board. How do you think John the Baptist died? Prophet Yahya, how did he die? Prophet Yahya died because he took the ethos of Prophet Idris alayhi salam. John the Baptist, revered in Christianity and Islam, Prophet Yahya had a king in his time who wanted to marry his niece. Prophet Yahya said to him, "O king, you can't marry your niece. In Islam or in the belief of God, the niece, you can't marry her. It's not allowed." He was disgruntled. His wife came and said to him, "I'll let you have this niece if you kill Prophet Yahya alayhi salam." Did Prophet Yahya sit back and say, well, because he's a king and he's looking after my family, I don't want to interfere? No. When there's a king who's unjust, when there's a king who is a hypocrite sitting on the throne of the Muslims, it's our role to speak out when we see this. Eventually, you know what that king did? He beheaded Prophet Yahya alayhi salam, took his head in his palace in Sham, and placed that head in the middle of the palace for everyone to see. You found that Prophet Yahya took the ethos of Prophet Idris. When I see a king who is unjust, it is vital for me to speak out. This conception of a king who is unjust raised a major debate in Islamic theology and political theory. What was the debate? The debate when Rasulullah brought the message of Islam was what? If there's a king who says La ilaha illallah and he says Muhammad Rasulullah, what is the attitude of a Muslim towards that king? As in, this became a debate in Islamic political theory, that if I'm a Muslim and I'm living in a Muslim land and there's a king who publicly professes La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, but he's a drunkard, he's a man of alcohol, he's a man who you could see of adultery, a man within the world of the musicians, a man who oppresses children, an innocent woman, this king, because he says La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, should I remain silent or should I speak out? Three different groups emerged on this issue. The first group were a group by the name of the Murji'ah. The Murji'ah were an Islamic theological political group. The Murji'ah came forward and said that even if a king drinks in front of me or commits zina in front of me, only Allah knows what's in his heart. Habibi, what are you talking about, what's in his heart? The guy is drinking right in front of me. As in, what more do I have to see? The guy in front of me is an alcoholic. The guy in front of me is committing adultery. He said, no. You can't. Because you don't know, maybe he has a pure heart. When he's drinking, he's doing it for pure reasons. MashaAllah. But that's unfortunate, as in that was the first political theological theory in Islam. And this theory, the kings used to love it, isn't it? As in this theory is a dream ticket for a king. Imagine now I'm a king, in front of the people, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. When I want to commit zina, I commit zina. When I want to drink, I drink. And I've got a group of puppets sitting next to me saying, but we don't know what's in his heart. Even today in our Muslim communities, you have people saying, Sayed Ammar, I don't fast and I don't pray but I have a good heart. What will happen to me on the day of judgment? On the day of judgment, Allah will take your heart, He'll put it in Jannah, and everything else He'll put in Jahannam. Isn't it? As in He'll put that heart in Jannah. He says, heart, you stay here in Jannah. It's good for you here. Everything else move. You find this was a ridiculous theory. A theory which was what? It was simply a theory to suspend judgment on certain big personalities. There's certain things I can't say on the minbar. I'm sure you understand. But all I need you to understand is that such theories were developed to suspend judgment on the character of certain personalities. Certain people who were publicly drunkards, publicly committing adultery, publicly sitting around with monkeys and musicians. You would have their puppet scholars being paid to say, we are the Murji'ah. We suspend judgment on a king because only Allah knows what's in his heart. That was the first group. Then there was a second group. What did they say? They said, yes, we can see the king is a Muslim and we can see he's committing bad acts, but we don't want to get involved in this issue. Say, what do you mean you don't want to get involved in this issue? Say, to tell you the truth, we're living comfortable lifestyles and we're happy that at home we pray and we fast, and let's say we come to the mosque on Fridays. You're telling me to speak out against the king? I don't want me to have a bad reputation. I want to live comfortably. I've got children, I've got a future. I want to see my daughter married and I want to see my son graduate. Don't come and tell me that I have to come and speak out against the king. That second group of Muslims in early Islam, they said, even if a king is corrupt, in your heart you should say, Ya Allah, I disagree with him. But in your actions, you don't need to get involved. Why? Because if Allah puts him in power, that means Allah knows better than us. Jalaluddin al-Suyuti, of all his great books, he had some classic works. Ad-Durr al-Manthur, Al-Itqan, Tarikh al-Khulafa, for example, Tafsir al-Jalalain, which he had with Jalaluddin al-Mahalli. Of his great books, he had a book called what? He had a book called Tadrib al-Rawi. Tadrib al-Rawi was looking at the narrators of hadith traditions. Within Tadrib al-Rawi, he has a chapter on a group of narrators he says are the people of Taqa'ud. Taqa'ud in English means the people of retirement, those who've retired. Suyuti says there are certain famous figures in Islamic history who retired from the Islamic political scene because they didn't want to get involved in speaking out against injustice. Who does he list? The first of them who he lists, Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas, the father of Umar bin Sa'ad. You know Umar bin Sa'ad, leader of the armed forces? He says the first of the people of Taqa'ud was Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas. What do we mean, people of Taqa'ud? People of Taqa'ud are this second group. They see Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan sitting on the throne of the Muslims, barbarically treating the Muslims. They stay quiet. You say to them, why do you stay quiet? Why don't you raise a mutiny against this man? Can't you see the corruption? They say, well, we don't really want to take sides on this issue. As in this Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas, the one time he took a side was when Muawiyah said to him, and this hadith isn't just in our books, brothers. This hadith is in the books of our brothers. Muawiyah says to Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas, why don't you curse Ali ibn Abi Talib? I tell you, sometimes I don't know this history we have. Sometimes, honestly, I don't know what is the scales which you use to look at this history. Amir Muawiyah fought Amir Ali. MashaAllah. Amir Muawiyah fought Amir Ali. Said to him, why don't you curse Ali ibn Abi Talib, Sa'ad? Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas said, I will never curse Ali ibn Abi Talib because of three things. Number one, on the day of Mubahala, the Quran said Ali is the nafs of Rasulullah, is the self of Muhammad. Number two, when we went to the battle of Tabuk, Rasulullah said Ali is to me like Aaron was to Musa. Number 3, on the day of Khaybar, every companion wanted that banner. And we were all thinking, who's Rasulullah going to give it to? And Rasulullah said, tomorrow I'll give the banner to a man who Allah and me love, and he loves me and Allah. When he enters a battlefield, he only returns with success. Said all of us were waiting to see which one of us was it, and he gave it to Ali. You found this Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas. Do you think that he stood up after this to support Ali ibn Abi Talib against that corrupt king? No, on the contrary. Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas, Suyuti says, was of those who retired. They performed retirement. They said, you know what, we can see the king is corrupt, but we remain quiet. It's better for us to keep our mouth shut. We'll read our salah, we'll read our fasts, and that's it. Another of these taqa'ud people was who? Abdullah ibn Umar ibn al-Khattab. Umar ibn al-Khattab had a son called Abdullah. This Abdullah bin Umar saw Yazid bin Muawiyah sit on the pulpit of Rasulullah as a drunkard, as a womanizer. People said, Abdullah bin Umar, your father was a Khalifa. Aren't you meant to stand up? He said, at the end of the day, I don't want to cause friction. I don't want to cause disruption. I don't want to cause disunity. You found Suyuti, what does he say? Suyuti says that Abdullah bin Umar, like Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas, was of the people of Taqa'ud. These were people who decided what? A king may be corrupt, but it's not our job to interfere. Our job is to pray our salah, to fast our fasts, and then on the day of judgment, Allah will judge that king, and he'll judge us as well. And that's why, when did this religion begin to break apart? This religion began to break apart when what happened? When the Muslims who were of the early days, instead of speaking out against the corruption of the kings, they remained silent. And that's why I tell you, the third school which emerged, what was it? The school of Al Muhammad. That when you see a corrupt king, irrespective of whether publicly he says La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, it's your role to speak out against that corruption. I tell you, you think Abu Dharr al-Ghafari and Hujr bin Adi al-Kindi, Amr bin Hamaq al-Khuza'i, Rushayd al-Hajari, do you not think people like this lost their lives for any reason except that they spoke out against the king of their time? Abu Dharr al-Ghafari, when Uthman did not want him in Medina, kicked him out. He said, get out, Muawiyah, you look after this person. He doesn't close his mouth. A follower of Al Muhammad is an Abu Dharr in his political standpoint. When he sees a corrupt king, he doesn't remain silent. Abu Dharr outside the palace of Muawiyah every day. Those who hoard the gold and the silver, Surah 9 verse 34. Those who hoard the gold and the silver. Those who hoard the gold and the silver. Those who hoard the gold and the silver. Until Muawiyah wrote to Uthman, he said, take this man back, he causes me a headache. Uthman took him back until eventually they made Abu Dharr die in the worst way possible. They made him die alone in the desert with no one to protect him. Abu Dharr al-Ghafari, who Rasulullah used to say, in taqwa, he is the equal of Prophet Isa alayhi salam. And Abu Dharr ends up dying. But dying in which cause? When he saw a corrupt king, he didn't take the position of the Murji'ah, nor the position of the people of Taqa'ud. He took the position that we within this school, when we see injustice, we speak out. Hujr bin Adi al-Kindi likewise, when he saw the injustice, he laid his son before the sword in front of Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan. And that's why it's not surprising when you look at the scholars of adab, the scholars of tariq, the scholars of kalam, all of them say this religion began to fall when Khilafah became mulk. When Khilafah became mulk, that's when the religion began to fall. As if you read in adab, read the works of Jahith when he talks about Muawiyah. Or even if you want to look at socio-political works like the works of Qutb and Aqad, look at their words when they say the religion was a khilafah and then transformed into a mulk. When it transformed into a mulk and people began to remain silent when this mulk was established, that's when the religion began to fall. And that's why you find the son of Fatima al-Zahra looking at the mulk being established in Sham and not remaining silent. The Murji'ah said, let's suspend judgment on Yazid. The people of Taqa'ud said, we prefer to stay in our houses like Abdullah bin Umar. Whereas Abi Abdullah al-Hussein said, no. When you see injustice, a man like me does not pledge allegiance to a man like him. And I tell you, those words ring in the ears of every follower of Al Muhammad in the world today. Where you see a corrupt king in certain parts of the world, you'll see the followers of Al Muhammad said, we will never be humiliated. Never. When we see kings today, and we don't need to mention on the minbar, but there are kings today, the hospitals they have destroyed. They don't allow people to be treated. Simply because of their madhab, they destroy the hospitals, they kill innocent women, innocent children. And they are kings who are despots, but who claim to want democracy. Why do you think those people stand? Because they saw a man who stood on the 10th of Muharram against the king. The king of his time was corrupt. The king of his time was known to be an open drunkard, an open womanizer, of a lascivious way of life. Did Abu Abdullah sit back? Did he say, I want to suspend judgment on him, I want to retire from the Islamic scene? No. Abu Abdullah taught us a vital lesson, brothers and sisters. You know what it was? Sometimes our communities may be frustrating for us the way they operate. But if it means that we take part in the community to speak out against injustice, and we lay our life at the end, and certain people change, then if one person changes, then their life has been worth the struggle which I've taken. Abu Abdullah could have easily said, you know what, yes, Yazid's a bad man, but my community is full of hypocrites, let me stay at home. No. If I, Abu Abdullah, can lay under the arrows of Bani Umayyah, then each one of you can as well. If I can speak out against that king, then each one of you can as well. And that's why after they killed the son of Fatima al-Zahra, they decided that this despotic, barbaric king, what would he do? Yazid ordered first, I want you to parade, I want you first to mutilate his body. They took his body on the night of the 11th of Muharram. Do you know what they did to his body? They ordered their horses to trample on his chest. That's why today when you see people beat their chests, it's in honor of that chest which had the hooves of the horses of Bani Umayyah digging through it. Then in Kufa he ordered parade his head everywhere. Then in Sham, do you know what he did? Islam had reached a level that Prophet Idris spoke out against the king of his time. You found Muslims next to Yazid who were witnessing Yazid parade the head of Abi Abdullah in Sham. And then Yazid, you know what was the biggest insult? He'd tell his woman in his court, go and get dressed. We have prisoners who have come to this court. Get dressed in your finest, so I display to you my finest victory. And he would sit there in front of the whole courtroom and recite the famous lines of poetry of the days of Jahiliyyah. ليت أشياخي ببدر شهدوا جزع الخزرج من وقع الأسل لا أهلوا واستهلوا فرحا ثم قالوا يا يزيد لا تشل لعبت هاشم بالملك فلا خبر جاء ولا وحي نزل. He would say, I wish my ancestors from Badr were present so that they see what I've done on this day. Hashim played with a kingdom. There was no revelation and there was no news. Open kufr in his courtroom. He told his servant, I want you to go and get my wife Hind. He was married to this lady by the name of Hind. This lady, when she was younger, was a servant in the house of Ali ibn Abi Talib in Medina. So this lady had seen Sayyida Zainab when she was there. She had seen Kulthum. She had seen Abu Fadl al-Abbas. She had seen Imam al-Hussein, Imam al-Hassan. When Imam al-Hassan died, Muawiyah forced her to marry Yazid. And therefore she had been living in Sham away from Medina for a great period of time. When Sayyida Zainab and Kulthum were brought into the court of Yazid in Sham, Sayyida Zainab sat down, Kulthum next to her. Yazid ordered, he said to one of his servants, go and tell Hind to come out in her finest. I have some rebels, I want her to see them. This Hind was sitting in her quarters. A lady came to her, she said, oh grand princess, there are some rebels who have been caught. Yazid wants you to come and see them. She said, where are these rebels from? The reply was, they were caught in a land called Karbala. She said, where is that? The reply was, this land known as Karbala is in the land of Iraq. She said, very well, I'll get changed, I'll get dressed and I'll come out. When she came out, she came and sat on her throne. Sayyidah Zainab turned around to Kulthum. She said to her, Kulthum, do you recognize that lady or no? Sayyidah Zainab knew who the lady was. Kulthum said, no, I don't recognize her. Who is she? She said, do you remember when she was younger? She'd come to our house in Medina. She'd sit with me and with you, and she'd sit with Hussein and with Abbas. At this moment, Kulthum said, Hind? She said, yes. At this moment, Kulthum couldn't believe, and Hind looked towards her. She said, you two who are whispering, where have you people come from? She said, we have come from the land of Medina. You know, as soon as Hind heard Medina, she came down from her throne to the ground. She sat on the ground. At this moment, Sayyidah Zainab looked at her. She said to her, why did you sit on the ground? She said, out of respect for the people of Medina. She said to her, what do you mean? She said, the people of Medina, I used to go and serve in a house in Medina when I was younger. At this moment, Sayyidah Zainab looked towards her, and imagine how much had Zainab grown that Hind doesn't even recognize her. The narrations mention that Hind looked at her. She said, oh lady, may I ask you about a house in Medina? I want to know, do you know them or not? Sayyidah Zainab said to her, which house? She said to her, may I ask you about the house of Ali ibn Abi Talib? She said to her, when I was younger, I used to serve in the house of Ali ibn Abi Talib. I want to ask you about some of the members of that house. Sayyidah Zainab did not reveal to her who she was. She said to her, go ahead, ask me. She said to her, can you tell me about Abu Fadl al-Abbas? Where is he now? I want to ask about Abbas. When I was younger, I'd see him in the house walking around. Sayyidah Zainab said to her, you want to know where is Abbas? She said, yes. She said to her, do you see that head on that spear? She said to her, yes. She said, that's the head of Abbas. Hind then looked towards her. She said, may I ask you about someone else? She said, whom? She said to her, may I ask you about Abu Abdullah al-Hussein? I haven't seen him since I left Medina, and I wonder about him, how he is doing now. Imagine how hard it was for Sayyidah Zainab. She looked to the other spear. She said, you want to see Hussein? She said, yes. She said, Abu Abdullah is on that spear over there. Hind couldn't believe the words. She then had to ask the inevitable. She said, I want to ask you about two ladies in the house of Ali ibn Abi Talib. She said to her, which lady? She said, I want to ask you about Kulthum and about a lady by the name of Zainab. How is she doing now? Sayyidah Zainab looked at her. She said, if you're asking me about Kulthum, then that is Kulthum. If you're asking about Zainab, then I am Zainab in front of you. When Hind heard this, she ran into the court of Yazid. Her hijab had fallen off. Yazid said to her, how dare you put your hijab on properly? She looked at him and she said to him, Yazid, you tell me about my hijab. How about the hijab of the daughters of Fatima al-Zahra? Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to raise us with Prophet Idris alayhi salam, to allow us to understand his message and follow his example. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to raise us with the Imam of our time, Imam Sahib al-Asr wal-Zaman. Allow us to be amongst his companions and those who follow his message in this world and receive his intercession in the hereafter. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the Surah Al-Fatiha, but before it, the loudest of your salawat.